There are stories a person is reluctant to tell. Not because they aren't interesting, on the contrary. It's just that some things are better kept inside. But over time, they begin to weigh on you. This story happened to me long before I had a family. I was about 25 then. I lived differently, freer, taking more risks. I loved going on solo trips, venturing into places with no signal, no people, and no familiar world. I usually chose remote forests and stayed there for several days. It was my refuge. Silence, solitude, and the feeling of being completely alone with nature. But one trip changed everything. My name is Egor. If you had asked me a few years ago who I was, I'd probably have answered simply a person who can't sit still. The city always felt too small for me. The noise, the people, the endless hustle had all started to weigh on me quickly. But as soon as I left civilization behind, found myself in the middle of a forest with no signal, no roads, no random passersby, I felt like a different person. Calmer, clearer, freer. I started going on solo hikes in my early 20s. At first, just short trips of a day or two, but over time that wasn't enough. I wanted to go deeper, further, to places where tourists never set foot. Where you are truly alone. Many of my acquaintances thought it was strange. Some even said it was dangerous. And honestly, they were right. But back then, I thought differently. I love that feeling when you are fully responsible for yourself. When there's no one to help if something goes wrong. It sounds silly, but in those moments, I felt truly alive. I wasn't reckless. I knew how to navigate, how to survive in the forest. I always took everything I might need. I wasn't looking for trouble, I just didn't avoid risk. And perhaps that's exactly what played a cruel trick on me one day. Because there are places you shouldn't go alone. And there are things no experience can prepare you for. I didn't understand that at the time. That time, I chose a place almost no one talked about. Even among hiking enthusiasts, it was considered a blank spot. No popular trails, no equipped campsites, no landmarks. Just a huge stretch of forest where few ventured beyond a couple of kilometers. And that's exactly why I went there. The drive took almost the whole day. First the highway, then a narrow, broken road, and in the end just a dirt path, more like an old logging trail. I had to leave the car where the road completely disappeared among the trees. From there only on foot. From the first steps, it was clear. This place was different. The forest here was denser than I was used to. Trees stood so close together that barely any light broke through the canopy. Even in the daytime, it was slightly dim, as if the sun reached this place late. And the silence, not the usual forest silence with birds and rustling leaves. A heavy, oppressive kind. As if the sound simply refused to linger here. I walked for several hours, navigating by map and compass, going deeper away from the spot where I left the car. Signal disappeared almost immediately. My phone became a useless piece of plastic. But that didn't bother me. On the contrary, it was part of why I came here. By the evening of the first day, I found a suitable campsite, a small clearing among the trees, with flat ground and dry branches around. I pitched the tent, lit a fire, cooked some food. Everything went perfectly. No footsteps, no traces of other people, no trash, no paths. Complete feeling that I was the first person here in a long time. And honestly, I liked it. The second day went almost the same way. I walked further, explored the area, sometimes just stopping to listen to the strange, oppressive silence. Over time, it didn't feel unusual anymore, it even began to feel normal. As if the forest was gradually accepting me. And that's when I started feeling something I couldn't explain at first. As if I had gone a little further than I should. But it was already too late to turn back. And to be honest, I didn't even seriously think about it. On the second day, closer to evening, I first noticed the forest starting to change. At first, almost imperceptibly. The light just grew dimmer, although there was still enough time before sunset. I looked up and saw the sky slowly filling with dark, dense clouds. They moved low, fast, as if driven by strong wind, even though down below, among the trees, the air remained almost still. It seemed strange. Usually before a storm, the forest noises of the wind starts, the ground shake. Here, it was the opposite. The silence deepened, as if it had been dialed up on purpose. I kept walking, but I glanced at the sky more often. 20 minutes later, everything changed abruptly, without warning. The first gust of wind hit so suddenly that I literally froze. The trees rustled all at once, as if someone had turned on a sound. The temperature dropped almost instantly. I felt the cold sweep across my skin and stopped to put on an extra layer. And that's when I realized this wasn't ordinary rain. Too fast. Too sudden. Too wrong. Within minutes, the sky turned completely dark. It looked almost like dusk, although there was still plenty of daylight. The wind grew stronger, now pressing through the trees, bending thin trunks. I quickened my pace. My thoughts were simple. Find shelter, wait it out, avoid falling branches. But the forest around me became increasingly restless. The first distant thunderclap sounded. Dull, heavy, something you feel in your chest more than hear. Then the rain. It didn't start gradually. It fell all at once. Heavy, dense, nearly a solid wall of water. In seconds, I was soaked through. Visibility dropped, and the trail, if you could even call it that, disappeared beneath my feet. The wind no longer just howled, it pressed down. I heard nearby branches breaking, sometimes with such a crack that I flinched involuntarily. Lightning struck ever closer. Each flash lit up the forest for a second, making it feel alien, distorted. And at that moment, it finally hit me. Standing in the open was dangerous. Very dangerous. I stopped, scanned around, and began searching for any kind of shelter. The problem was, around me only forest. Nothing else. I even thought I might have to wait out the storm under the trees when I noticed it. At first a silhouette. Through the rain, through the gray veil of water and wind, a straight line appeared between the trunks. Unnatural for the forest. Too straight. I squinted, took a few steps toward it, and my heart immediately started racing. It was a structure. Small, almost hidden among the trees, as if the forest tried to swallow it. The roof sagged, the walls were darkened by time and moisture, and everything around was overgrown so much that from a distance of a few dozen meters, it was nearly invisible. A cabin, or something like it. At that moment, I didn't think about who built it or why. There was only one thought in my head: a shelter. I hurried, almost ran, pushing through wet branches. The rain hit my face, the wind pushed my back, but with every step, the cabin grew closer, more real. The door was closed. Old, wooden, with a warped frame. I pulled the handle at first gently, then harder. It wasn't locked. The door creaked with a dull groan, as if resisting. I quickly stepped inside and shut it behind me. And immediately, it became quieter. Not completely, the wind still howled outside. The rain drummed on the roof, but it was muted. Distant. As if a thick wall had been placed between me and the storm. I took a few steps forward, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. Inside, it was empty. Almost. To the left are an old wooden table, warped and cracked. In the corner something like a bed made of boards. On the floor dust, dirt, and debris, as if no one had cleaned here for a long time. The smell was damp, musty. But still, it was better than standing in the downpour. I dropped my backpack next to the wall and ran a hand over my face, wiping away the water. My clothes clung to me, soaked through, but at least I was safe. At least, that's what I thought at the time. I approached a window, if you could even call it that, just an opening with shards of glass remaining, and looked outside. The forest almost disappeared behind the wall of rain. A lightning flash illuminated everything for a second, and the cabin appeared even stranger. Too lonely, too forgotten. But then I just exhaled and leaned against the wall. The main thing, I found shelter. For the first few minutes, I barely moved. I just stood, pressed against the wall, listening to the storm battering outside. My heart gradually calmed, my breathing evened out. It seemed the worst was over. But as soon as I started to recover and look around more carefully, that feeling began to crack. At first, I noticed the floor. It was dirty, covered in dust and debris, but not completely. Right by the entrance, the dirt had been disturbed, as if someone had walked here recently in wet shoes. Not old, frozen in place prints, but fresh, not fully dried. I frowned. That was strange. In this weather, someone could be here at the same time as me, but where were they? I slowly turned my head, scanning the details. The table. It looked old, cracked, but on one corner, almost no dust. As if something had been placed or touched there recently. I stepped closer, ran my finger along the surface. A clear line in the layer of dirt. A chill ran down my spine. I shifted my gaze to the bed in the corner. The boards looked old, but on them lay something like fabric, dark, crumpled. At first, I thought it was just trash, but moving closer, I realized it was a blanket. And it wasn't completely rotten. On the contrary, it looked relatively new, as if it had been used not long ago. I froze. A simple thought formed instantly in my mind, ruining all sense of safety. I wasn't alone, and it wasn't a hallucination. Too many small details didn't add up. If this place had been abandoned for years, it would look different. Covered evenly with dust, no traces of movement, no clean spots. But here someone had been. And judging by everything, very recently. I slowly turned toward the door. It was still closed. The storm outside continued to roar, but now the sound didn't feel protective. Rather, the opposite. As if it was hiding something else. Something I hadn't seen yet. At first, I tried to calm myself. Logic suggested simple explanations. A hunter, a forest worker, a random traveler. Someone could have used this cabin as temporary shelter just like I was now. But the longer I stood inside, the less it seemed true. I looked at the door again. At first glance, an ordinary old door. Warped, cracked. But as I stepped closer, details emerged that I hadn't noticed before. Inside, it was scratched. A lot. Deep, chaotic, intersecting scratches. Not like random damage from time, as if someone deliberately beat or scraped the wood. From the inside, I ran my fingers along the lines and immediately pulled back. Too fresh. Not perfectly new, but not old either. The wood inside the scratches was lighter than the rest of the surface. Someone had tried to get out. That thought hit instantly, and too clearly. I sharply turned to the window. Something was strange there too. The remaining glass in the frame wasn't just broken, it had been pushed outwards. The shards stuck outside, almost none left inside. As if someone had tried to escape from the inside. I took a step back. It all started to make sense, and I didn't like it. The door scratched from the inside. The window broken outwards. Fresh traces on the floor. Someone had been here. And this someone hadn't just lived here. They had tried to get out. I scanned the room again, differently this time. Not as shelter, but as a place where something had happened. And that's when I noticed another detail. By the door, inside, just above the handle, a metal clasp was screwed in. Rough, homemade. And next to it a broken thick wooden stick. An improvised bolt. But it was installed so that it locked the door from the outside. I froze. It clicked in my head. This cabin wasn't a refuge. It was a cage. And the worst part wasn't that. If someone locked the door from outside, it meant that this someone could return. At first, I thought I imagined it. Amid the wind, rain, and thunder, any sound could be distorted. The forest itself can play tricks on your perception, especially in weather like this. But then it happened again. Quiet. Barely audible. A scraping sound. Somewhere outside, very close to the wall. I froze, holding my breath. The wind howled in the gaps, the rain drummed on the roof, but now I barely noticed it. All my attention focused on one thing or the sound. Scrape again. This time longer. As if something was being dragged along the wood. I slowly turned my head toward the door. The sound came from there. And that's when I truly felt fear. Not sharp, not panicked or cold, rising slowly from within. Because it wasn't a random noise. It was deliberate. I took a cautious step back, trying not to make a sound. Then another. A footstep. Dull, heavy. Outside. Right by the entrance. I clenched my teeth. My thoughts were scrambling, but one broke through. Someone was standing at the door. I stared at it, expecting the handle to turn any second. But it didn't. Instead, another step. Then a pause. Then a blow. Sharp, dull, right into the door. I flinched, stepping back. The strike repeated. Stronger. The wood trembled slightly. I didn't understand what was happening. If it was a person, why weren't they trying to open the door? It wasn't locked. If it was an animal, why behave so strangely? Scrape again. Now closer to the handle. Slow. Dragging. As if something or someone was studying it. I swallowed hard, not taking my eyes off the door. And that's when I realized. Whatever was outside, it knew I was inside. And it wasn't in a hurry. At first, I thought the wind had made the door creak again. But when I felt it slowly yield, my heart nearly stopped. First, a light pressure as if someone leaned on it. Then it grew stronger, relentless, like an invisible hand testing how far the door could withstand. I stepped back, pressing to the wall, trying to hide, though I knew if the door opened, there would be no shelter. The wood creaked and bent. The brass latch rattled, producing a tinny sound, and I understood it wasn't just imagination. My heart pounded so loud it seemed to echo throughout the cabin. I tried to breathe evenly, but with every second, the pressure grew stronger, almost physically pressing on my chest. And that's when I realized something terrifying. Whoever or whatever was pressing on the door didn't need to break it. It just wanted me to stay inside. The scene froze for a moment as if the forest itself held its breath. I stood, listening to every creak, every rustle. The pressure on the door increased once more, a short jerk, and I felt it slightly open. I froze, pressed to the wall, and suddenly understood. The threat wasn't only outside. Whoever pressed the door could be nearby, but the cabin itself had become a trap. Every crack in the floor, every creak a potential path for attack. I looked around. Old scratches on the walls, the secured outside window, strange objects scattered on the floor all screamed of horrifying events that had happened here. And then cold fear gripped me. Maybe someone or something was inside with me, or watching from outside, fully aware that I was trapped. As if the forest had closed in around the cabin, and I realized. I wasn't just caught in a storm, I had become targeted prey. Every movement, every sound became a signal of danger. It became clear. Survival depended not only on staying dry and sheltered, but on recognizing where the enemy was and how it acted. The threat could be anywhere. Outside, inside, approaching in the darkness where I couldn't see. I realized that any wrong move, any dull sound could be the last. It was a warning, or an invitation. I instinctively took a step back, not daring to breathe or move. I barely managed to catch my breath when a sudden, deafening crack rang out. The window shattered. Cold wind and rain burst into the cabin along with a noise. Then I felt heat, scorching my skin. Flames erupted in the corner of the room, turning the cabin into a deadly trap. Smoke stung my eyes, my breathing became erratic. Every second felt like eternity. The door, behind which I had hoped to find salvation, was blocked, latched from outside. I lunged, trying to push it with all my strength, in vain. The fire grew, the heat became unbearable, and I realized staying in place was impossible. My heart raced, adrenaline exploded through my body. Thoughts of escaping alive flashed through my head, but options were almost gone. And then, in this chaos, I felt sudden, suffocating pressure on my back. Someone or something knocked me down, and I collapsed onto the wet floor. Outside, heavy blows, scraping, and creaking as someone tried to break in, pushing me aside. I fought back. Elbows, feet, grabbing at hair, trying to free myself. Cries, clanging metal, whistling wind merged into unbearable chaos. I felt every hit, every tug a real fight for life. With effort, I managed to push the attacker away, jumped up, soaked to the bone, and scratched. Without stopping, I ran blindly, trying to